There we go. Okay, just starting to get everything in order. Gonna give a few minutes for people to start trickling in, and then we'll get started with the reading. So I'm just gonna do some of this. I'll praise the song of my people. Really was a Native American flute and tune, so take that as you will. playing some flute. That's the call for them to get here. And if they're not here, I guess they're not. Alright, and they can always see it later. So let's get started. I did some of this on the last episode, but I got tired and lost, so we'll just start it over. The Ancient Mysteries and Secret Societies, Part 2. The entire history of Christian and pagan Gnosticism is shrouded in the deepest mystery and obscurity. For while the Gnostics were undoubtedly prolific writers, little of their literature has survived. They brought down upon themselves the animosity of the early Christian church. When this institution reached its position of power, of world power, it destroyed all available records of the Gnostic cultus. The name Gnostic means wisdom or knowledge and is derived from the Greek gnosis, which I believe is the root of our word to know. The members of the order claimed to be familiar with the secret doctrines of early Christianity. They interpreted the Christian mysteries according to pagan symbolism. Their secret information and philosophic tenets they concealed from the profane and taught to a small group only of especially initiated persons. And this is an interesting thing because it bridges Christianity and paganism, which is one of the lost things. In the past episodes, we've been talking about how all religions are really the one religion, which is the world tree religion. And paganism was not so much rooted out in Europe as it was given a new coat of paint as the Catholic Church. Simon Magus, or Magus, the magician of New Testament fame, is often supposed to have been the founder of Gnosticism. If this be true, the sect was formed during the century after Christ and is probably the first of the many branches which have sprung from the main trunk of Christianity. Everything with which the enthusiasts of the early Christian church might not agree, they declared to be inspired by the devil. That Simon Magus had mysterious supernatural powers is conceded even by his enemies, but they maintained that these powers were lent to him by the infernal spirits and furies which they asserted were his ever-present companions. Undoubtedly the most interesting legend concerning Simon is that which tells of his theosophic contest with the Apostle Peter while the two were promulgating their differing doctrines in Rome. According to the story that the Church Fathers have preserved, Simon was to prove his spiritual superiority by ascending to heaven in a chariot of fire. He was actually picked up and carried many feet into the air by invisible powers. When St. Peter saw this, he cried out in a loud voice, ordering the demons, spirits of the air, to release their hold upon the magician. The evil spirits, when so ordered by the great saint, were forced to obey. Simon fell a great distance and was killed, which decisively proved the superiority of the Christian powers. This story is undoubtedly manufactured out of whole cloth, as it is only one out of many accounts concerning his death, few of which agree. As more and more evidence is being amassed to the effect that St. Peter was never in Rome, its last possible vestige of authenticity is rapidly being dissipated. Well, I don't know very much about this controversy, but Simon Magus is an interesting figure. That Simon was a philosopher, there is no doubt, for wherever his exact words are preserved, his synthetic and transcending thoughts are beautifully expressed. The principles of Gnosticism are well described in the following verbatim statement by him, supposed to have been preserved by Hippolytus. To you, therefore, I say what I say and write what I write, and the writing is this: Of the universal eons, periods, planes, or cycles of creative and created life in substance and space, celestial creatures, there are two shoots, without beginning or end, springing from one root, which is the power invisible, inapprehensible silence, Bathos. Of these shoots, one is manifested from above, which is the great power, the universal mind ordering all things, male, and the other is manifested from below, the great thought, female, producing all things. Ah, very interesting. Hence, pairing with each other, they unite and manifest the middle distance, incomprehensible air, without beginning or end. And this is the Father who sustains all things and nourishes those things which have a beginning and end. Yes. This is something I've written about before. In the beginning there was the great infinity, and the great infinity divided itself in two, creating two infinities. That's to say, there are two shoots without beginning or end, springing from one root. That's two infinities springing from one infinity, which is the power invisible, inapprehensible silence. Completely transcendent nature. Just going to go ahead and mention, if you have any comments, and leave them in the Discord classroom, and make sure to @ me in them so that I see that I've been mentioned. It'll help me keep track of it. Okay. By this we are to understand that manifestation is the result of a positive and a negative principle, one acting upon the other, and it takes place in the middle plane, or point of equilibrium, called the pleroma. This pleroma is a peculiar substance produced out of the blending of the spiritual and material eons. Out of the pleroma was individualized the demiurges, the immortal mortal, to whom we are responsible for our physical existence, and the suffering we must go through in connection with it. In the Gnostic system, three pairs of opposites, called syzygies, emanated from the Eternal One. These, with himself, make the total of 7. The 6, 3 pairs of eons, living divine principles, were described by Simon in the Philosophumena in the following manner. The first 2 were mind, nous, and thought, epinoia. Then came voice, phone, and its opposite, name, onoma. And lastly, reason, logismos, and reflection, enthumesis. From these primordial 6, united with the eternal flame, came forth the eons, angels, who formed the lower worlds through the direction of the demiurges. See the works of H.P. Blavatsky. I remember I held up a copy of one of her books, the last one. How this first Gnosticism of Simon Magus and Menander, his disciple, was amplified and frequently distorted by later adherents to the cult must now be considered. It's an interesting thing to say that Gnosticism has its roots, or it has pre-Christian roots in Simon Magus. I mean, there's clearly pre-Christian Gnosticism. The Zadokite sect had many of the sayings of Jesus over 100 years before Jesus was born. So there's some things that are attributed to Christ that may not have been said by him first, but that doesn't really matter. The truth is the truth. Doesn't matter who said it first. It's just like, it doesn't matter, who came up with 2 + 2 = 4. Every teacher will teach you 2 + 2 = 4. Every teacher will do that. So, just because the Zadokites had sayings of Christ before Christ existed doesn't mean very much. The school of Gnosticism was divided into 2 major parts, commonly called the Syrian cult and the Alexandrian cult. These schools agreed in essentials, but the latter division was more inclined to be pantheistic, while the former was dualistic. While the Syrian cult was largely Simonian, the Alexandrian school was the outgrowth of the philosophical deductions of a clever Egyptian Christian, Basilides by name, who claimed to have received his instructions from the Apostle Matthew. Like Simon Magus, he was an emanationist with Neoplatonic inclinations. In fact, the entire Gnostic mystery is based upon the hypothesis of emanations as being the logical connection between the irreconcilable opposites absolute spirit and absolute substance, which the Gnostics believed to have been coexistent in eternity. Some assert that Basilides was the true founder of Gnosticism, but there is much evidence to the effect that Simon Magus laid down its fundamental principles in the preceding century. And this is pretty interesting to think about. I believe Valentinus was a student of Basilides, but the Valentinian school of Gnosticism is pretty much the most widely consulted today, though a lot of people, knowingly or not, reference Cathar Gnosticism from the south of France, which has a very important tie to Freemasonry that I think we'll get into later in this book. But suffice it to say that the Knights Templar were founded under very auspicious, let's say, circumstances, and went to the Holy Land and excavated the Temple Mount. And whatever they found there, they took from there to the south of France. And then they invented the modern art of banking and of people of check writing. From that Knights Templar group that was eventually banished and at the behest of the French king, who wanted to seize their enormous assets to pay off his debts. The Cathars were a remnant of much of the Templar teachings that had gone underground, and the Templar had maintained these Gnostic lineages through their crusaders in the Holy Land, and through those people they transmitted these mystery schools to modern Freemasonry and the Western world as we know it. The Knights Templar may have been involved in pre-Columbian trips to the New World. There's evidence of a expedition by a Venetian captain by the name of Niccolo Zeno, and the Zeno family is very well known, and they seem to have recovered maps that they had taken from the Fourth Crusade. The blind Doge Enrico Dandolo took from the Byzantine libraries these maps that supposedly were ancient maps that contained the New World on them. And this was 200 years before Columbus. And then, but the Venetians were, at the time, the main gold and silver merchants in Europe. They basically had a monopoly on the gold and silver trade between the Holy Land and Europe. So, because they controlled the Eastern Mediterranean navally, and their main rival was Genoa, and Christopher Columbus was Genoese or Genovese, and he was essentially trying to end the Knight Templar monopoly on the New World gold trade. That's unknown history, but if you look, you can find it. It's fairly well recorded. It's not that mythical, so to speak. Okay. Just hello, Hedge. I see Hedge said hello. It's always nice to have Hedge around. Alexandrian Basilides inculcated Egyptian Hermeticism, Oriental occultism, Chaldean astrology, and Persian philosophy in his followers, and in his doctrines sought to unite the schools of early Christianity with the ancient pagan mysteries. To him is attributed the formulation of that peculiar concept of the deity which carries the name of Abraxas. In discussing the original meaning of this word, Godfrey Higgins, in his Celtic Druids, has demonstrated that the numerological powers of the letters forming the word Abraxas, when added together, result in the sum of 365. The same author also notes that the name Mithras, when treated in a similar manner, has the same numerical value. Basilides caught that the powers of the universe were divided into 365 eons, or spiritual cycles, as we have days in a year, and that the sum of all these together was the Supreme Father. And to him he gave the Kabbalistical appellation Abraxas as being symbological, numerologically, of his divine powers, attributes, and emanations. Abraxas is usually symbolized as a composite creature with the body of a human being and the head of a rooster, and with each of his legs ending in a serpent. C.W. King, in his Gnostics and Their Remains, gives the following concise description of the Gnostic philosophy of Basilides, quoting from the writings of the early Christian bishop and martyr, St. Irenaeus. He asserted that God, the uncreated eternal Father, had first brought forth nous, or mind, this logos, word, this again phronesis, intelligence. From phronesis sprung Sophia, wisdom, and dynamis, strength. Here's a picture of Simon Magus being lifted up and dropped by these spirits when Peter's commands them to let him go. This is interesting stuff. People who are interested in the UFO phenomenon would do very, very well to take note of this this event of infernal demons of the air carrying Simon Magus into the air and being commanded by the Apostle Peter and obeying. Take close note of that in your mind. Simon Magus, having called upon the spirits of the air, is here shown being picked up by the demons. St. Peter demands that the evil genii release their hold upon the magician. The demons are forced to comply, and Simon Magus is killed by the fall. Poor guy. He just wanted to teach the teachings of thrice great Hermes. In describing Abraxas, C.W. King said, Bellarmine considers the composite image inscribed with the actual name Abraxas to be a Gnostic pantheos, representing the Supreme Being, with the 5 emanations marked out by the appropriate symbols. From the human body, the usual form assigned to the deity, spring the 2 supporters, Nous and Logos, expressed in the serpents, symbols of the inner senses, and the quickening understanding, on which account the Greeks had made the serpent the attribute of Pallas. His head, that of a cock, represents Phronesis, that bird being the emblem of foresight and of vigilance. His 2 arms hold the symbols of Sophia and Dynamis, the shield of wisdom and the whip of power. The Gnostics were divided in their opinions concerning the demiurgus, or creator of the lower worlds. He established the terrestrial universe with the aid of 6 suns, or emanations, possibly the planetary angels, which he formed out of and yet within himself. As stated before, the demiurgus was individualized as the lowest creation out of the substance called pleroma. One group of the Gnostics was of the opinion that the demiurgus was the cause of all misery and was an evil creature, who by building this lower world had separated the souls of men from truth by encasing them in mortal vehicles. The other viewed the demiurgus as being divinely inspired and merely fulfilling the dictates of the invisible Lord. I will note that I'm a member of this second camp that believe that the demiurge is not evil, but is serving God in a roundabout way. Because there's a divine plan in action. The demiurge is not evil, or he is evil, but evil is not irreconcilable with good. They're 2 halves of the same whole, and so he is a servant of God, the same as anyone else. Some Gnostics were of the opinion that the Jewish god Jehovah was the demiurgus. This concept, under a slightly different name, apparently influenced medieval Rosicrucianism, which viewed Jehovah as the lord of the material universe rather than as the supreme deity. My personal opinion is that Jehovah is the Lord of Earth, specifically the Earth, and that outside of this planet, his reign may not be so well regarded, but he is subservient to the true Heavenly Father. One might remember, if you look at Genesis 1, the origin of Jehovah is the Tetragrammaton, YHVH, which we've talked about before. But the Tetragrammaton is considered to be the first word of creation that was spoken. So it is implied in the Hebrew as in the beginning God. In the very beginning of Genesis 1, it says, in the beginning God. created the heavens and the earth. But in the beginning, God. And this is in the beginning, Elohim. But because all other actions in Genesis are accompanied by a saying, the rabbinical scholars noted that the first saying was not given explicitly as all the nine other sayings were. And this is because the secret saying was that of God's name, which was too powerful to write and was often not written. And so in the beginning, God was substituted with the epithet Elohim, which is a plural word which means the forces of creation. Plural forces rather than... Some people say it means plural gods, which is technically true, but the Kabbalistic interpretation is that it means God in his many forms. The one God spread through many. This is like the Hindu interpretation, where the central, the Hindu monastery that I visited in Kauai had a large 4.5 foot tall quartz crystal, and they explained that it was the shape of their deity. In that, the divine also had many facets, and to them they were Saivites, the Shiva worshippers, and so they considered Shiva to be the plane that faced toward them. That was the thing, the aspect of God that was oriented toward them as the worshiper at the moment that they were worshiping the Supreme at that temple. But that's not to say that that's the only facet or aspect. And that's where you get into Elohim. And then when we talk about Jehovah, it may also be that Jehovah, Jehovah may also only be Lord of this universe, whereas the ultimate of ultimates, the Ein Sof, is beyond, is king of the universe of universes. The great multiverse is ruled. There's a hierarchy almost of gods, and this is one of those things that the Latter-day Saints get into more than anyone else. But I don't want to get too off track on this. So let's return, shall we? The Gnostic viewpoints concerning the Christ is well worthy of consideration. This order claimed to be the only sect to have actual pictures of the divine Syrian. While these were in all probability idealistic conceptions of the Savior based upon existing sculpturings and paintings of the pagan sun gods, they were all Christianity had. To the Gnostics, the Christ was the personification of the Nous, the divine mind, and emanated from the higher spiritual eons. He descended into the body of Jesus at the baptism and left it again before the crucifixion. The Gnostics declared that the Christ was not crucified, as this divine Nous could not suffer death, but that Simon the Syrian offered his life instead, and that the Nous, by means of its power, caused Simon to resemble Jesus. Irenaeus makes the following statement concerning the cosmic sacrifice of Christ. When the uncreated, unnamed Father saw the corruption of mankind, he sent his firstborn Nous into the world in the form of Christ, for the redemption of all who believe in him out of the power of those that have fabricated the world, the demiurgus and his 6 sons, the planetary genii. He appeared amongst men as the man Jesus and wrought miracles. See King's Gnostics and their remains. The Gnostics divided humanity into 3 parts. Those who, as savages, worshipped only the visible nature. That's the Sarkics or the Helix, the people who worship only or lived only in the flesh. Those who, as savages, worshipped only the visible nature. Those who, like the Jews, worshipped the demiurges. These are what Paul calls the psychikos, the people who worship the mind. And lastly, themselves or others of a similar cult, including certain sects of Christians who worship Nous, the true mind, and the true spiritual light of the higher eons. And this is the spiritual mind rather than the psychic mind. Psychic in Greek, it's better, you have to take the Greek meaning of psychic in this sense rather than our modern usage of the word psychic, because we often apply it to mean something greater than they used to. But essentially they divided all beings into 3 classes, and then there were Sarkics, who were animals, soulless animal. I mean, they could be humans, but they had no soul. They had no soul or mind. They were basically animal humans that lived only by instinct, and were generally wild men or beasts or barbarians, terrible men, and the Jews are in the New Testament, and even in the Old Testament, when Moses comes back up from the mountain and finds that the Israelites have begun to worship the golden calf. They're worshiping the demiurges, and that's why Moses becomes so angry and breaks commandments over his leg, or over his, he breaks the 10 commandments. The traditional image is that he breaks it over his knee. Which, if you think about it, is just incredible that he was so angered by the fact that they had rejected the true spiritual reality in favor of the mental reality. The same thing that's happening, the same spiritual disease that goes on today, where people confuse the perception of the object for the object itself. This is the spiritual disease where we see the Jews began to worship the golden calf, the idol, instead of worshiping God in truth. They should have been worshiping God, having no idol anywhere, but instead they worship this item. Just like that, we human beings have a tendency and especially in our society and today, we have a tendency to focus on our perceptions of things and believe that they are actually real in the way that we perceive them. And there's a disconnect that we kind of erase in our minds. There is a thing that exists, and it gives stimulus to our system, but our perceptions of it, what we actually see as being a universe out here, is a projection that is constructed inside the mind by taking all of this raw input data from all of the senses and combining it and parsing it, and then that data is then used by the great computer of the brain to construct a model of the universe. And what you perceive around you is not the universe. What you perceive around you as the room you're in and the things, the items that are around you, they're not around you. Well, they are around you, but what you're perceiving or what you think you're looking at is actually your mental projection of them. And if you confuse your mental projection for the thing itself, then you become lost in attachment. And that's where, for example, Buddhism comes in and says, this is the root of all suffering. This is the root of all suffering in life. When you make that fundamental mistake of confusing your perception for the object, you have wedged yourself in such a way that you will not be able to escape that situation without suffering some kind of harm to yourself. So, in order for things to go back to working properly, a system was devised to... It's a medicine. Christ is like Asclepius, or it's like Buddha. They're all described as great physicians of the soul. They're physicians of the soul. It's a spiritual problem. One is a psychic if one lives in the world of the mind. That lives in the world of the mind, meaning that the projections of the mind, if you live in that world, the world that is just the projection of your mind, then you're trapped. You're trapped because you don't know that you're living in a projection. But if you live in the world of the spirit and you understand that these things around you aren't real in the sense that you are perceiving them, then you've grasped the true nature of the thing, and the path to freedom becomes open to you. And that's the key to all of these things with the Gnostics. Exactly what he's talking about here, the divisions of these people as sarkics, psychics, and pneumatics, which he is saying as savages, and those who, like the Jews, worship the demiurges, and lastly themselves, or the enlightened. There are those who live by the Spirit. Many of you are probably of that group, and many of you may be in the group of psychics who are very, very close to being healed. And you just need that final little push to fully understand that the perception that what you think is the world outside of you is not the world outside of you, is not the actual world outside of you. It's a sensory conglomeration. It's like if you were wearing a virtual reality helmet of extremely advanced complexity. You can also think that the movie The Matrix is like a fine representation of it, where they all are plugged in. It's like they live in the Matrix and they think the Matrix is real, but there's a real world outside of it. And that's what this is like. There's the spiritual world is the real world, but the world that you perceive around you is the constructed world of the mind. That is a projection based on the sense data that you receive. Okay. Now that that's covered, after the death of Basilides, Valentinus became the leading inspiration of the Gnostic movement. He still further complicated the system of Gnostic philosophy by adding infinitely to the details. This he did. He increased the number of emanations from the Great One, the Abyss, to 15 pairs, and also laid much emphasis on the Virgin Sophia, or wisdom. In the books of the Savior, parts of which are commonly known as the Pistis Sophia, may be found much material concerning the strange doctrine of eons and their strange inhabitants. James Freeman Clarke, in speaking of the doctrines of the Gnostics, says these doctrines, strange as they seem to us, had a wide influence in the Christian church. Many of the theories of the ancient Gnostics, especially those concerning scientific subjects, have been substantiated by modern research. Several sects branched off from the main stem of Gnosticism, such as the Valentinians, the Ophites, which were serpent worshippers, and the Adamites. I don't know too much about the Adamites. After the 3rd century, their power waned, and the Gnostics practically vanished from the philosophic world. An effort was made during the Middle Ages to resurrect the principles of Gnosticism, but owing to the destruction of their records, the material necessary was not available. Even today, there are evidences of Gnostic philosophy in the modern world, but they bear other names, and their true origin is not suspected, like the movie The Matrix. Or there are many, many, many examples of Gnostic philosophy in Hollywood, Gnostic philosophy in pop culture, literature, music, all kinds of things, because God is always working to reveal the truth. And it's clearly written in the Bible, these things, but it's written in a kind of code, because on one level, the level that you physically are reading, that's the level of your mind's projection. But there's another level, which is the spiritual level, and it's what the Bible speaks to your heart, which is the spiritual organ, the spiritual center of the body. Which, by the way, is the reason why, when in the Egyptian tale of the afterlife, your heart would be weighed on a scale. The alligator god would weigh your heart on a scale against a feather. And if your heart was lighter than a feather, then you would enter into heaven. And if your heart was heavier than a feather, you would be devoured by the great devourer. So how can your heart be lighter than a feather? Here it is. Your heart can be lighter than a feather if it's the spiritual reality of the heart. If you leave the physical behind, if you are able to leave this all behind and enter fully into the spiritual world, the real world, again, then you'll be in heaven. But if you cannot release your attachments to the physical, the material, then you'll be trapped eternally trying to get free. You'll be trapped until you're free. I mean, essentially. It's like you are trapped. Your only two choices are to be trapped or be freed. So the moment of death, or the time coming just after death, is the great awakening for most people. I don't know. I don't have like statistics on it, but it seems that most people going through the process of dying and then coming through to the other side, that's what makes it click for them, that, oh, okay, God is real and the spiritual world is real, and now we can have a big party on the other side. They have a big party for you when you arrive. Your death day is celebrated like your birthday. It's the biggest birthday party you've ever seen. You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it. But don't kill yourself, because that's the one way to be sure that it won't be that. You'll be trapped again. You'll have to do this all over again, and you don't want that. You don't want to keep doing this over and over again. All right. Enough of my preaching, proselytizing, and whatnot. After the death of Basilides, yes. We already read this section, yes? Let's read it again. After the death of Basilides, Valentinus became the leading inspiration of the Gnostic movement. He still further complicated the system of Gnostic philosophy by adding infinitely to the details. He increased the number of emanations from the Great One, the Abyss, to 15 pairs, instead of 3 pairs. And also laid much emphasis on the Virgin Sophia. Yeah, much more complicated cosmology. But if you go back to Babylonian and Sumerian texts, they line up extremely closely. I mean, if you go to really any pagan cosmology, you're going to find that there's a clear, consistent pattern that swoops through them. That's for a reason. That's all I'm saying. Okay. James Freeman Clarke, speaking of the Doctrines of the Gnostics. These doctrines, strange as they may seem to us, had a wide influence in the Christian church. Many of the theories of the ancient Gnostics, yeah, we did read this section, especially those concerning scientific subjects, have been substantiated by modern research. Yeah, a lot of the Enlightenment and a lot of the Renaissance had to do with the rediscovery of Hermetic texts that literally so these texts were in the Byzantine archives. They had been saved from the destruction of the library in Alexandria, Egypt, and they had been taken to Constantinople. There may have been another step in that somewhere, but they ended up in Constantinople, and from Constantinople they ended up in Venice. Why? Because Venice started a crusade called the Fourth Crusade, and they got sidetracked. Oh, oops, we meant to sail to the Holy Land, but accidentally here we are in Constantinople and we're invading and we sacked the whole city. Surprise, folks. Surprise. They didn't do it on accident. They knew what they were looking for, and they were looking for esoteric texts that were hidden in what at that time was the equivalent of the modern day Vatican archives. And if you ask me, I would love to go into the Vatican archives today and root around a little bit, let's say, because there's some stuff in there that would blow all our minds, I am sure. After the 3rd century, their power waned, and the Gnostics practically vanished from the philosophic world. An effort was made during the Middle Ages to resurrect the principles of Gnosticism, but owing to the destruction of their records, the material necessary was not available. Even today, there are evidences of Gnostic philosophy in the modern world. Yeah, that's what we were talking about. That's where I got sidetracked there. Many of the Gnostic concepts have actually been incorporated into the dogmas of the Christian Church. The Baptists have a lot of Gnostic concepts. The Mormons have a lot of Gnostic concepts. I mean, Gnosticism is alive and well, but it's been transformed into something different. And when the LDS Church says that they are the true Church of Jesus Christ on earth today, they mean that they're the living Church of Jesus Christ, because they're the pneumatic Church of Jesus Christ. Whereas the Catholic Church is the psychic Church of Jesus Christ. It's the church of the mind, not of the spirit. And the Mormon Church, on the other hand, is the church of the spirit and not of the mind. And that's why the things written in the Book of Mormon appear to be so ridiculous on the surface. Because to your mind rejects them out of hand. But if you give them time to speak to your heart, their spiritual significance will become clear to you. I'm looking around for my phone because I was using it to track my Discord stuff. Oh, so, okay, that's good I checked Discord. Palladium Moores, the Ruiner, asks, do you relate having a spiritual heart that is light as a feather with being able to travel to the spiritual world and leave your body, such as an astral projection and the Philosopher's Stone? I absolutely do. You have to. If you're trapped in your mind and you think that you're going to have a mind perception of your astral journey, you're going to fail. You're going to trick yourself into failure every time. You have to increase your spiritual sensitivity, and in doing so, you begin to open your third eye, your spiritual eye, and your spiritual sight begins to form. And eventually it becomes clearer than your real sight, than your physical eyes. Though most people maybe Jesus and Buddha could had that level of development, but for most of us, through a glass darkly is is how we can see the spiritual world on this side of the veil of life and death. It just so happens that that is part of the test of being here, is we're cut off from the spiritual world in particular, and it tests us in that we need to know. It's a test of our faith, of whether or not we can follow the word of God, because God provides to us here all the evidence and instructions that we need in order to succeed. But we have to actualize ourselves. We have to reach up before God can reach down and take our hand and pull us up. We have to first make the effort to toward Him. And that's where it says, ask and ye shall receive. It doesn't say, sit idly by and ye shall receive. No one who sits idly by shall receive. Only he who asks will receive. Ask and ye shall receive. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. So, it also has to do with the Philosopher's Stone, because the Philosopher's Stone, it is written. I searched for a long time to find the Philosopher's Stone or the formula for it, and there is. Let me see if I can find this acronym. It's they're on the gravestone of Christian Rosencreutz. On the gravestone of Christian Rosencreutz. Of Rosicrucian fame. There's an acronym written there that is in Latin. It's like Veritas and something. It basically means, I know what it means in English. The translation is the truth is found in the inner earth. Some people have been like, oh, that means the earth is hollow. When people are telling you the earth is hollow, use your head. Not your mind. Use your heart. Not your head. The earth is hollow. They're saying something very profound to you. This earth that you see around you is hollow. It has no actual substance. The inner earth is the true earth, the earth that matters. And the Philosopher's Stone, the truth of eternal life, immortality is yours. As soon as you let go of all of this, and you know that this, your spiritual life, is never ending. You're immortal. It's just that this will end. You're going to die physically. This physical self will die, but it's not any different than dying in a video game. I mean, you'll feel it. You'll have perceptions because this is a very, very good video game. A very, very accurate simulation. But it's still not the real thing. And it's for training purposes only, as they would label it. The mysteries of Serapis. The identity of the Greco-Egyptian Cerebus, known to the Greeks as Serapis and the Egyptians as Serapis, is shrouded by an impenetrable veil of mystery. While the deity was a familiar figure among the symbols of the secret Egyptian initiatory rites, his arcane nature was revealed only to those who had fulfilled the requirements of the Serapic cult. Therefore, in all probability, excepting the initiated priests, the Egyptians themselves were ignorant of his true character. So far as known, there exist no authentic accounts of the rites of Serapis, but an analysis of the deity and his accompanying symbols reveals their salient points. I remember that I must have read this last time because I brought up the astrology connection of Taurus the bull and Serapis. The age of Taurus the bull was the age when Serapis worship was prominent on the earth. Then the age after Taurus is Aries, which is the age of Moses, and that is the age where rams were sacrificed instead of the bull. And then what was sacrificed in our age, it was Pisces, the fish. In Greek, fish is ichthys, which is an acronym, which is Jesu Christos Theoios Soter. Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. He's the one who's sacrificed in our age. In the next age, it will be Aquarius, the man who carries water. When Christ's disciples asked him, "Where shall we go to prepare the Passover?" he said, "Follow the man who carries water into his house." Houses of the zodiac. The Passover happens just like the procession of the equinoxes. The procession of the equinoxes occurs on March 21st, or traditionally March 21st. The procession of the equinoxes happens then, but so that's when the equinox is traditionally, but it could be these days is 19th, 20th. It varies by century accurately, but generally the traditional date was March 21st before they knew that it changed or that it could change. The date of Passover is based on the lunar calendar, which is the first full moon after the equinox. So it could be anywhere from 0 to 28 days after after March 21st. And that is, if you go back and you read the Bible with an eye to this, it will open your heart doors to the Bible, because you will for the first time understand all the astrological symbols that are happening. If you start to understand the symbolic languages with your mind, it will overflow into your heart. It's guaranteed. That's why the symbolic language is in such powerful usage. For example, in the Freemasons. The Freemasons are there to wake people up. That's what the initiation rites are for. And then once people are spiritually awakened inside the Freemasons, then they go about their secret missions. Much as most of us do. We have our missions and goals that are assigned, but we can't talk about those. yeah. A god I am, such as I show to thee. The starry heavens are my head, my trunk the sea. Earth forms my feet, mine ears the air supplies. The sun's far darting brilliant rays mine eyes. Several unsatisfactory attempts have been made to etymologize the word Serapis. Godfrey Higgins notes that Soros was the name given by the Egyptians to a stone coffin. George Soros. George Soros. George Soros. Let that sink in. Say it 3 times so it does. Then, and Apis was Osiris incarnate in the sacred bull. These 2 words combined result in Soros Apis, or Sorapis, the tomb of the bull. But it is improbable that the Egyptians would worship a coffin in the form of a man. Several ancient authors, including Macrobius, have affirmed that Serapis was a name for the sun because his image so often had a halo of light about its head. In his oration upon the sovereign sun, Julian speaks of the deity in these words: one Jove, one Pluto, one sun is Seraphis. In Hebrew, Seraphis is seraph, meaning to blaze out or to blaze up. For this reason, the Jews designated one of their hierarchies of spiritual beings seraphim. The most common theory, however, regarding the origin of the name Serapis, is that which traces its derivation from the compound Osiris Apis. At one time, the Egyptians believed that the dead were absorbed into the nature of Osiris, the god of the dead. While marked similarity exists between Osiris Apis and Serapis, the theory advanced by Egyptologists that Serapis is merely a name given to the dead Apis or sacred bull of Egypt is untenable in view of the transcendent wisdom possessed by the Egyptian priestcraft, who in all probability used the god to symbolize the soul of the world, the anima mundi. The material body of nature was called Apis. The soul which escaped from the body at death but was enmeshed with the form during physical life was designated Cerebus. Are you seeing some patterns here, some similarities to what we've just been talking about? I think that these things are definitely vital to our understanding. C.W. King believed Serapis to be a deity of Brahmanic extraction, his name being the Grecianized form of Sarada or Shripa, 2 titles ascribed to Yama, the Hindu god of death. Perhaps. This appears reasonable, especially since there is a legend to the effect that Serapis, in the form of a bull, was driven by Bacchus from India to Egypt. The priority of the Hindu mysteries would further substantiate such a theory. The priority of the Hindu mysteries, this is something important to note, is that the Hindu mysteries are essentially the oldest on the planet and considered to have the greatest provenance that we have today. If we still had Atlantean texts or such things, if they ever existed, who knows? But those things would have to the Hindu mysteries, however, all of these things are the same, but the Hindus definitely understand the mysteries as well or better than other people. It's all Sanatana Dharma. Everything that we're talking about is Sanatana Dharma. It's all the one great truth. It's all Hinduism. Whether we like it or not, to call it that, Hinduism is is the root faith of the world, pretty much. Though it has many, many branches of its own, and we can more correctly say that that there is one root faith, and that is what I call the world tree, the faith of the world tree, which Hinduism is the foundation of that temple. The foundation of the temple is built in Hinduism, and the walls these things are built by the accompanying religions, and the little statue Moroni on the top, that's the LDS Church today. Okay, among other meanings suggested for the word Cerebus are the sacred bowl, the sun in Taurus. The sun in Taurus, pay attention to astrology. The soul of Osiris, the sacred serpent, and the retiring of the bowl. The last appellation has reference to the ceremony of drowning the sacred Apis in the waters of the Nile every 25 years. The lion-faced light power. It really didn't enlarge very much, did it? The Gnostic Gem. That did a little better. But the Gnostic Gem represents by its serpentine body the pathways of the sun, and by its lion head the exaltation of the solar in the constellation of Leo. That's interesting because exaltation, because Leo would have been the prior age. No, that would, I guess, Gemini. I'm getting my astrology all messed up in my head now. But Labyrinths and mazes were favored places of initiations among many ancient cults. Remains of these mystic mazes have been found among the American Indians, Hindus, Persians, Egyptians, and Greeks. Some of the mazes are merely involved pathways lined with stones. Others are literally miles of gloomy caverns under temples or hollowed from the sides of mountains. The famous Labyrinth of Crete, in which roamed the bull-headed Minotaur, was unquestionably a place of initiation into the Cretan mysteries. Yes. We still go through the labyrinth today, except now the labyrinth is composed of symbols and texts. We've transitioned from making physical structures, which we still do that too. Look at the Washington Monument, but we've transitioned from merely making physical structures to also working with the symbolic language, which they did then before. Captain Cornhole, he says, I suspect that the Indian mysteries are descended from pre-flood traditions, which I think is also true of the Druid mysteries, but they didn't survive well enough for good comparison. Well, as we noted on that last time when we talked about the Druid mysteries, they had a clear Noah reference and ark and flood myth reference, and perhaps everything non-Abraham. Yeah. Well, the Hopi Native Americans who live near the Grand Canyon, they have a myth of a great flood as well. And they say that the ant people came up out of the Grand Canyon and led them down beneath the earth. And they survived by hiding in caverns in the Grand Canyon through the Great Flood. And that's how the Hopi people survived. And then they came back out onto the North American continent. How about that? So, you inner earth weirdos, there you go. Inner earth people took Hopis down. They were called ant people. Which also, if you look at Greek myths, the Myrmidons of Achilles' soldiers were called Myrmidons, which are ant men. It means ant people. Ant men. Myrmidons, ant-like. So, Myrmidons took the Hopi into the Grand Canyon. There is considerable evidence that the famous statue of Serapis in the Serapeum at Alexandria was originally worshipped under another name at Sinope, from which it was brought to Alexandria. There is also a legend which tells that Serapis was a very early king of the Egyptians, to whom they owed the foundation of their philosophical and scientific power. After that, this king was elevated to the estate of a god. Phylarchus declared that the word Serapis means the power that disposed the universe into its present beautiful order. That's a good meaning. In his Isis and Osiris, Plutarch gives the following accounts of the origin of the magnificent statue of Serapis, which stood at the Serapeum at Alexandria. While he was pharaoh of Egypt, Ptolemy Soter had a strange dream. Ptolemy Soter means savior. Ptolemy the Savior had a strange dream in which he beheld a tremendous statue, which came to life and ordered the pharaoh to bring it to Alexandria with all possible speed. Ptolemy Soter, not knowing the whereabouts of the statue, was sorely perplexed as to how he could discover it. While the pharaoh was relating his dream, a great traveler by the name of Cerebus, coming forward, declared that he had seen such an image at Sinope. The pharaoh immediately dispatched Soteles and Dionysus to negotiate for the removal of the figure to Alexandria. 3 years elapsed before the image was finally obtained, the representatives of the pharaoh finally stealing it and concealing the theft by spreading a story that the statue had come to life, and walking down the street leading from the temple, had boarded the ship prepared for its transportation to Alexandria. Upon its arrival in Egypt, the figure was brought into the presence of 2 Egyptian initiates, the Eumolpid Timotheus and Manetho the Sebenite, who immediately pronounced it to be Serapis. The priests then declared that it was equipollent to Pluto. So it was the equivalent of Pluto, god of the underworld. This was a masterly stroke, for in Serapis the Greeks and Egyptians found a deity in common, and thus religious unity was consummated between the 2 nations. They had other religious unities. Amun was seen as being Zeus. Baal Haman, Baal Haman in Carthage was seen as being Saturn, interestingly enough. And Amun is the source of Haman and Baal Haman. Baal means Lord. Baal Haman means Lord Amun. Saturn. Ra is the sun. Amun is Saturn. But the 2 are one and the same. Have you seen the vast underground ancient sites in Derinkuyu? You know, my sister Emma spent a year and a half in Turkey, and I am positive she went there. She talked about it. I'm sure she talked about it to me before. Perhaps many ancient people survived underground. It's, who knows? Could be. Could be. Perhaps many ancient peoples did survive underground. Perhaps we will survive underground again. If there's ever a nuclear holocaust or something of that sort. I guess, you know, that's what Fallout games and a lot of the 1960s like Fallout shelter madness was all about. Anyway, several figures of Cerebus that stood in his various temples in Egypt and Rome have been described by early authors. Nearly all these showed Grecian rather than Egyptian influence. In some, the body of the god was encircled by the coils of a great serpent. That's the Kundalini energy. This is a universal symbol throughout mythologies all around the world. Coiling serpents, coiling up the midriff. That's the spinal column energy. Why are there 33 degrees in Freemasonry? Because there's 33 bones in the spinal column. Here's another one. What is the importance of the number 32 in Hebrew? 32 and 33. 32 is 10 numbers and 22 letters. The 10 numbers are equivalent to the 10 Sephiroth. There are 32 times that Elohim is mentioned in Genesis 1. 32 times his name is mentioned. 10 of those times he says something, and then he says something and he creates it. 22 of those times are other things that he does in the process of creating. They're further split down into further subdivisions of elementals, mothers, and doubles. There are 3 mothers, 7 elementals, and 12 doubles. But that's getting more complicated than necessary to explain that 10 numbers, 0 through 9. Not as one might think, 1 through 10. Common misconception. The 10 numbers are 0 through 9. Zero is a very important number. Don't forget that. Okay. 10 numbers, 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. So from whence does it come 32? 32 is the expression of all creation. All creation can be expressed with 32. With 10 numbers and 32 letters, or in 22 letters. That can express through quantity and quality everything can be expressed through language combined in that. And 33 is the self aspect of God that God took and put into creation. It is God in creation. It is the God spark, or the spiritual spark, the life energy. 32 is the physical, is the created world. 33 is the living world. The mystery of the 33rd degree is a great one, and it has a lot to do with reincarnation. If you're a 33rd degree Mason, then you've been a Mason in a past life. And it has been confirmed by your lodge. A description of the god that in all probability is reasonably accurate is that which represents him as a tall, powerful figure, conveying the twofold impression of manly strength and womanly grace. The universal androgyne. His face portrayed a deeply pensive mood, the expression inclining towards sadness. His hair was long and arranged in a somewhat feminine manner, resting in curls upon his breast and shoulders. The face, save for its heavy beard, was also decidedly feminine. The figure of Cerebus was usually robed from head to foot in heavy draperies, believed by initiates to conceal the fact that his body was androgynous. This is precisely the imagery of Shiva in the Shaivite cult of Hinduism. I use cult in a positive sense there as sect, the Shaivite sect. Just like the cult of Mithras, it's not a negative thing. They weren't like... Cult is not a negative term anyway. People use it negatively. They mean it as an insult, but it's not really an insult. Though some cults, some things that are cults are weird personality, mental illness things, but some of them are also mysteries from God. If a cult gets people to kill themselves, clear sign that they were not a mystery cult. Killing yourself is one of the universal things that you cannot do in the mysteries. You do not have the right to decide when you die. God decides that. You do not have the right. That is something that our modern culture does not agree with. Most people feel they own their life and that they have a right to choose when they die. They have a right to end their life at any time, and that they would feel uncomfortable if they didn't know they had an exit whenever they wanted it. And I think that's bullshit. Yeah, frankly, it's bullshit. Anyway. I expect all of you to live to a ripe old age, and where you will pass away peacefully. And then you will be welcomed on the other side with a great death day party, and everyone will get super wasted. It will be Bacchanalian, Saturnalian. Okay. Various substances were used in making the statues of Cerebus. Some undoubtedly were carved from stone or marble by skilled craftsmen. Others may have been cast from base or precious metals. One Colossus of Serapis was composed of plates of various metals fitted together. In a labyrinth sacred to Cerebus stood a 13-foot statue of him, reputed to have been made from a single emerald. Wow. Wow, that would be a massive emerald. Modern writers discussing this image state that it was made of green glass poured into a mold. Yeah, but who trusts modern writers? According to the Egyptians, however, it withstood all the tests of an actual emerald. Clement of Alexandria describes a figure of Cerebus compounded from the following elements. First, filings of gold, silver, lead, and tin. Second, all manner of Egyptian stones, including sapphires, hematites, emeralds, and topazes. All these being ground down and mixed together with the coloring matter left over from the funeral of Osiris and Apis. The result was a rare and curious figure, indigo in color. Some of the statues of Cerebus must have been formed of extremely hard substances, for when a Christian soldier carrying out the edict of Theodosius struck the Alexandrian Cerebus with his axe, that instrument was shattered into fragments and sparks flew from it. It is also quite probable that Cerebus was worshipped in the form of a serpent, in common with many of the higher deities of the Egyptian and Greek pantheons. This is a... I will say that yes, it was, and here's the clear proof of that. The Serapis is the bull. Taurus, the bull, is directly opposite the astrological sign Scorpio. Scorpio in ancient times was not seen as being a scorpion, but a serpent. So I've gone over this before, but in the primary sign of an age is the sign in which the sun rises in the east. That sign will sit on the horizon as the sun rises in the east on the spring equinox for that entire age, and until the next age begins, and then it will start to be the next sign, and it will move through that over a period of 2,160 years. The secret sign of the age is the one diametrically opposed on the chart from the one that the sun rises in. So it's the one that the beam of the sun touches on the far end. It's the one that is setting in the west. And the one opposite Serapis, or the one opposite Taurus, is Taurus the bull. Serapis the bull is Scorpio the serpent. In that time it was the serpent. So Serapis was also worshipped as a serpent. Serpent of knowledge, the twirling serpent of the Kundalini energy. To Moses, the outward sign was the ram. The ram was the sacrifice of the age, but the secret sign was Libra, the scales, which is what? The law. Moses was the lawgiver. He brought to the Jews the law. He gave them the Torah, the book of the law. The next one, Pisces, we've gone over Jesus and Ichthus, but the opposite sign is Virgo for the Virgin Mary. The secret sign of our age is the secret goddess worship cult of the Virgin Mary within the Catholic Church and others. Worship of the Virgin Mary and the Heavenly Mother, the Mother of God. That is the secret sign of our age, and that is the oppressed symbol. That is the... Why does Mithras trod on the head of a serpent while he slays the bull? Because he oppresses the serpent while sacrificing the bull. Why are women treated the way they are in our society. And why are we just now coming out of that? Because Virgo is the oppressed sign of our age, opposite of Pisces, the sacrificial fish, which is Jesus Christ. These astrological signs are clear signs of the ages. The next one, the next secret sign will be Leo. And no one knows quite what this is going to be, but I have it on good authority that look to the Lion of Judah for an interesting take on that. When the lion will lay down with the lamb, the millennium, the coming millennium, is when the lion will lay down with the lamb. And when was the lamb? That was the age before Pisces. The lion will be the secret sign of the age after Pisces. Christ said, "Follow the man who carries water into his house, and there you will prepare the Passover." Anyway. Hopefully someone said, can they get a better look at this? Is I forget what it's called. What are they called? Palomina or something. Anyway, it's like a scarf. It's not a cape. But it's a shawl of a kind, but it's a long-standing tradition for people to wear prayer shawls, shamanic shawls, and this is mine. And it is a symbol of my office as shaman. Shaman and priest. Cerebus was called Theon Heptagrammaton, or the god with the name of 7 letters. The name Cerebus, like Abraxas and Mithras, contains 7 letters. In their hymns to Cerebus, the priests did the 7 vowels. Occasionally, Cerebus is depicted with horns or a coronet of 7 rays. These evidently represented the 7 divine intelligences manifesting through the solar light. The Encyclopedia Britannica notes that the earliest authentic mention of Cerebus is in connection with the death of Alexander. Such was the prestige of Cerebus that he alone of the gods was consulted in behalf of the dying king. The Egyptian secret school of philosophy was divided into the lesser and the greater mysteries, the former being sacred to Isis and the latter to Serapis and Osiris. Wilkinson is of the opinion that only the priests were permitted to enter the great mysteries. Even the heir to the throne was not eligible until he had been crowned pharaoh, when, by virtue of his kingly office, he automatically became a priest and the temporal head of the state religion. See Wilkinson's Manners and Customs of the Egyptians. A limited number were admitted into the greater mysteries. These preserved their secrets inviolate. Much of the information concerning the rituals of the higher degrees of the Egyptian mysteries has been gleaned from an examination of the chambers and passageways in which the initiations were given. Under the temple of Serapis destroyed by Theodosius were found strange mechanical contrivances instructed by the priests in the subterranean crypts and caverns where the nocturnal initiatory rites were celebrated. These machines indicate the severe tests of moral and physical courage undergone by the candidates. After passing through these torturous ways, the neophytes who survived these ordeals were ushered into the presence of Serapis, a noble and awe-inspiring figure illumined by unseen lights. Labyrinths were also a striking feature in connection with the rice of Serapis, and E.A. Wallace Budge in his Gods of the Egyptians depicts Serapis minotaur-like with the body of a man and the head of a bull. Labyrinths were symbolic. Well, the body of a man and the head of a bull. In many shamanic traditions, it's traditional in a ritual. For example, in Africa and the Amazon, even today, to see large ceremonial head masks. They're still used in African initiatory traditions and Amazonian initiatory traditions, Papua New Guinean initiatory traditions today. So the body of a man and the head of something can indicate to you a ceremonial position of a shaman wearing a animal attribute helmet or head covering prepared for that purpose. The symbols of these things is the important part, but they also wanted to depict them realistically in what they looked like outwardly as well as inwardly. So inwardly, the spiritual form of that shaman is the bull, but the physical form of that shaman is the body, is the body of a man. Thus we have shape-shifting, werewolves, werebulls. This was a werebull kind of thing, lycanthropy, but tarcanthropy. Much of the information given concerning the rituals of the higher degrees of the Egyptian mysteries has been gleaned from an examination of the chambers and passageways. Under the Temple of Serapis destroyed by Theodosius. Yeah, severe tests of moral and physical courage. I went back a little bit there, but it just caught my eye, the severe tests of moral and physical courage. That's a common theme in initiatory rituals throughout the world. One has to be tested. In the mysteries, one has to be tested. Not everyone passes. That's okay. They can try again later. In another life. The Gnostic mysteries were acquainted with the arcane meaning of Serapis. Through the medium of Gnosticism, this god became inextricably associated with early Christianity. In fact, the Emperor Hadrian, while traveling in Egypt in AD 24, declared in a letter to Servianus that the worshippers of Serapis were Christians, that the bishops of the church also worshipped at his shrine. So the Christians were secretly worshipping at Serapis. He even declared that the patriarch himself, when in Egypt, was forced to adore Serapis as well as Christ. Because they're one and the same. Syncretism was a common thing back then, and widely disparaged now, but it should not be, because it's indicative of deeper spiritual truths, though diverging physical realities. The little suspected importance of Serapis as a prototype of Christ can be best appreciated after a consideration of the following extract from C.W. King's Gnostics and Their Remains. There can be no doubt that the head of Serapis, marked as the face is by a grave and pensive majesty, supplied the first idea for the conventional portraits of the Savior. The Jewish prejudices of the first converts were so powerful that we may be sure no attempt was made to depict his countenance until some generations after all that had beheld it on earth had passed away. Serapis gradually usurped the positions previously occupied by the other Egyptian and Greek gods, became the supreme deity of both religions. His power continued until the 4th century of the Christian era. In AD 385, Theodosius, that would-be exterminator of pagan philosophy, issued his memorable edict De Idolo Serendipidis Deruendo, on the destruction of the Seraphian idol. When the Christian soldiers, in obedience to this order, entered the Serapeum at Alexandria to destroy the image of Serapis, which had stood there for centuries, so great was their veneration for the god that they dared not touch the image lest the ground should open at their feet and engulf them. At length, overcoming their fear, they demolished the statue, sacked the building, and finally, as a fitting climax to their offense, burned the magnificent library, which was housed within the lofty apartments of the Serapeum. Several writers have recorded the remarkable fact that the Christian symbols were found in the ruined foundations of this pagan temple. Socrates, a church historian of the 5th century, so different Socrates than the Greek philosopher, declared that after the pious Christians had raised the Serapeum at Alexandria and scattered the demons who dwelt there under the guise of gods, beneath the foundations was found the monogram of Christ. Well, a god can certainly desecrate his own temples, can't he? Such a thing is allowable, and no great harm will be done. It was a change in image. Like I said, a new coat of paint was put onto paganism, and Roman Catholicism was born. The two quotations will further establish the relationship existing between the mysteries of Serapis and those of other ancient peoples. The first is from Richard Payne Knight's Symbolical Language of Ancient Art and Mythology. Hence, Varro, in De Lingua Latina, says that Coelum and Terra, that is, universal mind and productive body, were the great gods of the Samothracian mysteries, and the same as Serapis and Isis of the later Egyptians, the Tautos and Astarte of the Phoenicians, and the Saturn and Ops of the Latins. The second quotation is from Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. These, says Martianus Capella in this hymn to the sun, the dwellers on the Nile adore as Serapis, and Memphis worships as Osiris. In the sacred rites of Persia thou art Mithras, in Phrygia Attis, and Libya bows down to thee as Ammon, and Phoenician Byblos as Adonis. Thus the whole world adores thee under different names. Let he who has ears hear. The Odinic mysteries. Ooh. Know we have some Norse lovers out there. This will be a good one. This is one particularly close to my heart because as a young gentleman, I particularly loved the myth of Odin, and I associated him very closely with my grandfather, who was 32nd degree Mason. I'm sure he will be a 33rd one day. The date of the founding of the Odinic mysteries is uncertain. some writers declaring that they were established in the 1st century before Christ, others the 1st century after Christ. Robert McCoy, 33rd Degree, gives the following description of their origin. It appears from the Northern Chronicles that in the 1st century of the Christian era, Siga, the chief of the Asher, an Asiatic tribe, emigrated from the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus into northern Europe. He directed his course northwesterly from the Black Sea to Russia, over which, according to tradition, he placed one of his sons as a ruler, as he is said to have done over the Saxons and the Franks. He then advanced through Cimbria to Denmark, which acknowledged his 5th son Skjold as its sovereign, and passed over to Sweden, where Gilf, who did homage to the wonderful stranger and was initiated into his mysteries, then ruled. He soon made himself master there, built Sigtuna as the capital of his empire, and promulgated a new code of laws, and established the sacred mysteries. He himself assumed the name of Odin, founded the priesthood of the 12 Drottars, Druids, perhaps, who conducted the secret worship and the administration of justice, and as prophets revealed the future. The secret rites of these mysteries celebrated the death of Balder, the beautiful and lovely, and represented the grief of gods and men at his death and his restoration to life. Balder, the beautiful and lovely. Jesus Christ, the beautiful and lovely. The beautiful and lovely. Mithras, the beautiful and lovely. He who was sacrificed, he who was torn to pieces for the sake of the world, and then was brought back together and revived, resurrected. After his death, the historical Odin was apotheosized, his identity being merged into that of the mythological Odin, god of wisdom, whose cult he had promulgated. Odinism then supplanted the worship of Thor, the Thunderer, the supreme deity of the ancient Scandinavian pantheon. The mound where, according to legend, King Odin was buried is still to be seen near the site of his great temple at Uppsala. The 12 Drottars who presided over the Odinic mysteries evidently personified the 12 holy and ineffable names of Odin. The rituals of the Odinic mysteries were very similar to those of the Greeks, Persians, and Brahmins, after which they were patterned. The patterning after the Brahmins, one must be familiar with the Indo-Aryan hypothesis in order to find this credible. Out of the Indus River Valley civilization, the Proto-Indo-Europeans moved northwest and continued to the Caucasus. So the Caucasians are not necessarily from the Caucasus. They may have come down from the Caucasus to the Indus River Valley and then returned, but India is the root of civilizations. This is a secret that, it's an open secret. We trace so much of our mysteries back to Babylon and Sumer, but India is perhaps the true root of them. And so the Indo-Aryan hypothesis was that these Caucasians who went into the Indus River Valley migrated northwest over time, pushed out by Dravidians, and eventually went to Europe, especially Northern Europe. And where they encountered native peoples in Europe too, who had dark skin and blue eyes. And the Celtic peoples and especially the Basque people are probably the oldest surviving descendants of those original Europeans that before the Proto-Indo-European invasion or migration period, as you might say. Just checking on some of the chats, see if anyone's saying anything. Okay. The mound where, according to legend, King Odin was buried is still to be seen near the site of his great temple at Uppsala. The 12 Draugrs who presided over the Odinic mysteries evidently personify the 12 holy and ineffable names of Odin, after which they were patterned, after the Brahmins, Persians, and Greeks. The Draugrs, who symbolize the signs of the zodiac, very important. Once again, the precession of the equinoxes rears its head. The signs of the zodiac, vital to your understanding of the mysteries, is understanding that within every one of these traditions, the zodiac and the ages of the precession of the equinoxes. The Draugrs, who symbolize the signs of the zodiac, were the custodians of the arts and sciences, which they revealed to those who passed successfully the ordeals of initiation. Like many other pagan cults, the Odinic mysteries as an institution were destroyed by Christianity, but the underlying cause of their fall was the corruption of the priesthood, which it almost always is. The corruption of the Christian priesthood is what led to the rise of the saints. There's always a ongoing process of corruption and revival. It's an ongoing thing. It has to do with reincarnation patterns, and anyway, it's not very important to get bogged down in. People will probably latch on to what I say about it too much, so better to just skip over the details. Mythology is nearly always the ritual and the symbolism of a mystery school. Briefly stated, the sacred drama which formed the basics of the Odinic mysteries was as follows. Ooh, the good stuff. The supreme invisible creator of all things was called All-Father. His regent in nature was Odin, the one-eyed god. Like Quetzalcoatl, note this for later, Quetzalcoatl, according to the Book of Mormon, was Jesus Christ. Like Quetzalcoatl, Odin was elevated to the dignity of the supreme deity. According to the Draugrs, the universe was fashioned from the body of Ymir, the hoarfrost giant. Ymir was formed from the clouds of mist that rose from Ginnungagap, the great cleft in chaos. In primordial frost giants and flame giants had hurled snow and fire. The three gods, Odin, Vili, and Ve, slew Ymir, and from him formed the world. From Ymir's various members, the different parts of nature were fashioned. After Odin had established order, he caused a wonderful palace called Asgard to be built on the top of a mountain. And here the 12 Aesir gods dwelt together, far above the limitations of mortal men. On this mountain also was Valhalla, the palace of the slain, where those who had heroically died fought and feasted day after day. Each night their wounds were healed, and the boar whose flesh they ate renewed itself as rapidly as it was consumed. That's good for the boar. Well, it's probably roasted, though. Balder the Beautiful, the Scandinavian Christ, was the beloved son of Odin. Balder was not warlike. His kindly and beautiful spirit brought peace and joy to the hearts of the gods, and they all loved him save one. As Jesus had a Judas among his 12 disciples, so one of the 12 gods was false. Loki, the personification of evil. Loki caused Hother, I don't know. I know how to pronounce the special vowels. The blind god of fate to shoot Balder with a mistletoe arrow. Mistletoe is also important to the Druids, remember. Mistletoe is also important in modern day Christmas. You hang mistletoe and then you kiss under it. Remember mistletoe. With the death of Balder, light and joy vanished from the lives of the other deities. Heartbroken, the gods gathered to find a method whereby they could resurrect the spirit of eternal life and youth. The result was the establishment of the mysteries. The Odinic mysteries were given in underground crypts or caves. The chambers, 9 in number, represented the 9 worlds of the mysteries. The candidate seeking admission was assigned the task of raising Balder from the dead. Although he did not realize it, he himself played the part of Balder. He called himself a wanderer. The caverns through which he passed were symbolic of the worlds and spheres of nature. The priests who initiated him were emblematic of the sun, the moon, and the stars. The 3 supreme initiators, the sublime, the equal to the sublime, and the highest, were analogous to the worshipful master and the junior and senior wardens of a Masonic lodge. After wandering for hours through the intricate passageways, the candidate was ushered into the presence of a statue of Balder the Beautiful, the prototype of all initiates into the mysteries, like Bacchus and Christ. Christ is the prototype for his own disciples. That is why he went to John the Baptist, and John the Baptist said, when Jesus asked to be baptized, he said, "You're the one who should be baptizing me. Why am I going to baptize you?" And Jesus said, basically, I'm doing this so that the proper order of things may be done. That's a paraphrase, but essentially he did it because he's the prototype for which all Christians are meant to follow in his footsteps. If you follow in the footsteps of Christ, you will come to his realizations. You will become like Christ. You will become like God. Theosis. This figure stood in the center of a great apartment roofed with shields. In the midst of the chamber stood a plant with 7 blossoms, emblematic of the planers. In this room, which symbolized the house of the Aesir, or wisdom, the neophyte took his oath of secrecy and piety upon the naked blade of a sword. He drank the sanctified mead from a bowl made of human skull, and having passed successfully through all the tortures and trials designed to divert him from the course of wisdom, he was finally permitted to unveil the mystery of Odin, the personification of wisdom. He was presented in the name of Balder with a sacred ring of the order. He was hailed as a man reborn, and was said of him that he had died and had been raised again without passing through the gates of death. Richard Wagner's immortal comedy, Der Ring des Nibelungen, is based upon the mystery rituals of the Odinic cult. Yeah, the Ring saga is really powerful stuff. Wagner, in general, knew what he was on about. While the great composer took many liberties with the original story, the Ring operas, declared to be the greatest tetralogy of music dramas the world possesses, have caught and preserved in a remarkable manner the majesty and power of the original sagas. Beginning with Das Rheingold, The action proceeds through Das Valkyrie, Valkyrie, and Siegfried to an awe-inspiring climax in Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods. Here we'll look at a picture of the 9 worlds of the Odinic mysteries. The Nordic mysteries were given in 9 chambers or caverns. The candidate advanced through them in sequential order. These chambers of initiation represented the 9 spheres into which the Draugrs divided the universe. First, Asgard, the heaven world of the gods. Second, Alfheim, the world of the light and beautiful elves or spirits. 3. Niflheim, the world of cold and darkness, which is located in the north. 4. Jotunheim, the world of the giants, which is located in the east. Midgard, the earth world of human beings, which is located in the midst, or middle place. Vanaheim, the world of the veins, which is located in the west. Muspelheim, the world of fire, which is located in the south. 8. Svartalfheim, the world of the dark and treacherous elves, which is under the earth. And Helheim, the world of cold and the abode of the dead, which is located at the very lowest point in the universe. It is to be understood that all of these worlds are invisible to the senses, except Midgard, the home of human creatures. But during the process of initiation, the soul of the candidate, liberated from its earthly sheath by the secret power of the priests, wanders amidst the inhabitants of these various spheres. There is undoubtedly a relationship between the 9 worlds of the Scandinavian and the 9 spheres, or planes, through which the initiates of the Eleusinian mysteries passed in their ritual of regeneration. Very interesting stuff. Let's take a closer look at this. It may not be very big, though. I don't know why. So it's interesting to see. Earth is shaped like an egg. Santa Claus lives at the North Pole. Santa Claus is a wise old man with a red beard, and he brings you great gifts. He brings you great gifts around the time of the winter solstice. What is the greatest gift of all? The gift of salvation. The gift of freedom. Well, it looks like we're done with our chapter, and I'll be wrapping it up. I'm going to do another one tomorrow night at the same time. Hopefully. I'm 99% sure we'll do that. Yeah, so have a good night. I'll play us out. Let me play with this flute. This is the wiser of the two.